Welcome to BeEnriched, a learn-at-home project produced by the Wellness Institute of Greater Buffalo in cooperation with the Buffalo Public Schools and hosted by Buffalo Public School teachers. Your host for today's virtual field trip is Michele Agosto, Director of Arts for the Buffalo School System. Now please join Michele as she travels to fun and educational destinations throughout Western New York.
Hello BPS family, welcome to BeEnriched, a televised field trip program just for you. I'm Michele Agosto and I'm the Director of Arts for the Buffalo Public Schools, and I am thrilled to be here with our new friend Seppala. And Ian is the Education Director for the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's absolutely a pleasure. Welcome to the museum.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I walked through the doors and I felt like I was 6 years old again. It was wonderful. It's a great place. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Carrousel Museum. Is it okay if I call it the Carrousel Museum?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about the history and then talk about the amazing things that have happened here and still kind of happen here. So I know that a gentleman named Alan Herschell created a company called Alan Herschell Company around 1915 and started this idea of creating amusement parks, amusement rides and things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit about Alan Herschell and his history here?
Yeah, sure. So Alan Herschell was actually a Scottish immigrant. He came to the United States with his parents, and he actually started working in a whole different industry with steam engines. He then experimented looking at different rides and different things and settled on carousels. Mm-hmm. He had 3 different companies here in North Tonawanda that made carousels, including the Alan Herschell Company.
Okay. And so that's an interesting connection there, that idea of these steam engines and moving parts in a museum. I think that's a neat connection, and I'm sure it was wonderful for him. It seemed to make sense to him, I'm sure. Now, I know in reading about the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum, you have about 3,000 or over 3,000 hand-carved wooden carousels were produced right here, and they're all over the world. Can you talk about, that's a lot of carousels and a lot of horses.
Yeah, it is. So actually about 50% of all American carousels were built right here in the city of North Tonawanda.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we're really proud of that history. You can still ride them all over the world. We have functioning carousels, of course, here. There is one in San Diego. There are some in Australia. All over the place you can see Alan Herschell carousels.
Yeah.
And the horses were actually hand carved here using an assembly line system. So actually everyone got to work together making different pieces, and then they'd all come together for these one animal. It would allow it to make a lot faster animals, mm-hmm. but also still make them look really nice.
So was there a person that actually designed the horse, or was there a pre-design that they kind of followed along?
So the pre-design was made by the master carvers, so they kind of had their own plans. It's like if you're using like a coloring book, mm-hmm. so you already have it there, but you're just kind of filling in the lines. The rest of the carvers would fill in the lines from the master to create the same kind of horse that everyone was working on.
I see. So then parts of the horse, is usually a horse,
yeah.
gets carved by certain people down the line, and then they get painted.
Yes.
And that's a whole other
It's a whole other department.
Yes.
Yep.
That's really cool.
They were all hand painted here as well. We had a master painter who would put a little piece of paint on each area to tell the other people which color it had to be, and then they would paint them.
Okay.
When it comes to animals as well, they would make other animals too. It's mostly horses, but they had 35 different other animals.
Okay.
That would include like lions, tigers, bears.
Oh my.
Oh my, indeed.
And I saw a frog out there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the frog? 'Cause
Sure.
I love frogs.
Frogs are great. So the Alan Herschell frog, who's also known as the hop toad,
Okay.
is kind of really special.
Okay.
It is the only frog made by an American company. It is also the only animal that was made with clothing. So he actually has his pantaloons and his little bow tie, and that's because he comes from a very popular children's book called Wind in the Willows.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Alan Herschell was looking for inspiration when they were making a frog, and he was reading his sons a bedtime story and saw the frog in the book and said, this is what we need to do.
Alan Herschell sounds so interesting because it sounds like he is a creative mind and connects his scientific background into kind of this idea that now we kind of call STEM or STEAM.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that interesting combination between engineering and design and artistry?
Yeah, sure. So it's a really important part for us even here at the Carousel Museum of blending history and art and STEAM or STEM as well. So we're able to use the pieces, like we have a bunch of gears and things like that, and that needs to be able to make everything work. The artistry comes second when it comes to actually having fun on the ride. So you'll be able to see it and go, wow, that looks really pretty. But if you weren't going up and down, you wouldn't really be enjoying yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
STEM's really important for us here.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Something else that's kind of STEM aligned or STEAM aligned is your music roll department, the Wurlitzer Music Roll Department. And you know, it's almost like they go hand in hand, the carousel and the music. If you're going on a carousel, even if you're going up and down, if you don't have the music, it's just not the same thing. And that's what makes it so like American. I don't know, there's something about that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So North Tonawanda is the only city in the United States that actually built these band organs. And they were mostly built in Europe. Alan Herschell actually convinced the family to move over here to start building them in the United States. So we're the only place that made them originally. And now we're the only place that can still make them. So we still make the rolls today to play our organs, so we can make sure we have a full ride with our music as well.
So our young people that are watching, when we say rolls, they may think of, I don't know, there's all sorts of things that are rolls, but they may not really kind of envision what a roll of music looks like. Can you kind of describe it so they can kind of get a visual of what that looks like?
Sure. So it's a big roll of paper, kind of looks like a scroll if we've ever seen something like that. And we pull it out, it has a series of holes. These holes, when they are on, when the music is on, the hole will be open. When it's closed, the paper will be there. So it's a binary coding system using this kind of sheet of paper that is all rolled up into one.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. Do they ever break?
So the rolls can break, which is why we're able to make them here ourselves. So after thousands of rides and all the fun that we're able to have with them, we will need to make and use new rolls.
And where does the music come from when you're riding a carousel? I see something behind us, and does it actually sit in that box and container, or is it hidden in the middle? Where does it come from?
So we do normally keep our machines on the inside, but that is a band organ. So that is what the music will be coming out of.
Okay.
So the whole machine is run on air, and the rolls will be read using a system for air that will actually play and read everything right inside the machine.
That is really amazing. Yeah. That is all STEAM right there.
Yes, it is.
So I want to talk, there's a picture you have on the website, and it's of this little girl, like her eyes and her mouth, she's in awe of a carver carving. I can imagine that when you get young people coming through here, they all look like that little girl, just like stunned with amazement of, you know, there's so much whimsy here. What can young people do when they come here?
So when young people can come here, they can see us carving. We have volunteers that carve during the week, so you can actually see it working. We have this beautiful children's gallery in here where they can play old-time games, they can do matching puzzles, and we do have STEM activities in here on the weekends as well. And then, of course, we can all ride the carousel.
Oh, that's fun.
Not just for our young friends, that's for everybody. And we all become young when we're on the carousel.
Oh, for real. And you know I'm going on that.
Oh, so. Of course. I'd love you to.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was my pleasure.
And I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. We're welcome that you came, and we're hoping all of our other friends will come and visit us sometime as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of the Community Action Organization of Western New York, the CAO. For more information on the CAO's five-pronged approach to fight poverty in the Buffalo area, log on to caowny.org.
Hello, everyone. We're back with our friend from Forest Lawn, Laura Fitzgerald, who is the Director of Community Engagement and Volunteer Coordinator. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So there's, you know, the Forest Lawn is an incredible place. It's in the middle of the city, And when you go in there, it changes your view about life. I don't know, there's something about that space. I want to talk a little bit about the history.
Sure.
And the gentleman who thought this was a great idea. And maybe you can share more about why this place is so important to Buffalo.
Sure.
So in 1849, it was a gentleman named Charles Clark, who was a Buffalo lawyer, decided to purchase land in what was called the country at the time, which is really quite funny.
Yeah, it's very
it was
bizarre,
a different world then. And he bought all this land to create a new kind of American cemetery.
Correct.
And he aligned it to a design he found in Paris. Can you talk a little bit about how he was inspired by this Parisian cemetery?
Sure. Basically what had happened was, most kids when they're studying social studies or history in school, they hear all about, the Industrial Revolution, right? So families were moving, people were moving to cities in great droves for more opportunities. Previous to that, they were all living out in the country and they were working on farms and they would get buried in their churchyard or in their family property. But when everybody started moving to the city, then there was this huge explosion. More people were dying, obviously, because they were in closer proximity to one another. And there was just a need for a different kind of burial opportunity. So Charles Clark, not sure if it was 100%, if it was only Père Lachaise, it could have also been Mount Auburn, which was the first rural cemetery in the country. But it was a new way because people from all different ethnicities could be buried in the same place, different religions could be buried in the same place, and it was outside the city limits. So it's what's known as a rural cemetery because the city of Buffalo actually only extended as far as North Street at that time. So so his idea was to bury people outside of the city limits because there was concern over disease spreading, through the water and all that stuff. So they put everybody outside the city. And that's where this rural cemetery came about. And Père Lachaise was actually a garden that was turned into a cemetery. So that's kind of a little bit of the inspiration behind it. Mount Auburn, it was a group of horticulturists who came up with this idea of a rural cemetery and making it into like an English garden. So that's where he kind of got his idea to bring it forward into Buffalo.
I see. And it's so interesting because when people hear the term cemetery or burial grounds, there's a solemnness, a sadness. But when you go into Forest Lawn, it really allows you to respect the people that are there. You call them residents. You respect the residents.
Exactly.
But you also can enjoy the art and the sculpture and the nature and the history.
For sure.
Yeah. So can you share that? I mean, that is such an unusual element.
It's an unusual combination.
Yeah.
I always say, when I always get excited and I say I work for a cemetery for a living. I give tours in the cemetery. People are like, what? But actually, if you think about it, cemeteries, especially rural cemeteries, were the foundation. They were what inspired public parks. We didn't have public parks. The cemeteries were there first. The rural cemeteries were there first. Frederick Law Olmsted actually visited Forest Lawn, and it was one of the cemeteries that inspired his idea for the Buffalo Park system.
Oh, that's interesting.
So art museums too, they didn't open until I think it was like almost 1850. The first one in the country was in Massachusetts. So this was a way to show art as well and nature. So
to everyone.
And it was open to everyone.
Right.
Yes.
So I know I'd like to jump over quickly to the art before we get to the residents. There are two of my favorites.
Okay.
The Three Graces, which are the bronze. It's like a bronze fountain in a mirror lake, which is beautiful. And there's another called the Blue Sky Mausoleum, which I love only because it's connected to Frank Lloyd Wright, who's connected to everywhere in Buffalo.
Yes, exactly.
Can you talk about those two?
Sure. Well, the Three Graces fountain, it's a replica of one that's at an estate in Long Island, I believe.
Okay.
And then the Frank Lloyd Wright, obviously, Blue Sky Mausoleum was designed for the Darwin Martin family. Unfortunately, Darwin Martin, as many of you may know from the segment we did on the Martin House, passed away, and he was penniless when he died. So the monument was never built in his lifetime. But Forest Lawn was able to procure the plans, and they built it and it's absolutely stunning.
Man, it is stunning.
Yes.
So I want to jump over to the residence.
Sure.
So there are really famous people there.
A lot of famous people there. And
We have
you'd be
a president
surprised.
there.
Yes. President Millard Fillmore is buried there. Yes.
We have a congresswoman there.
Yes,
Shirley
Chisholm, who was also the first African American woman to ever run for president with a major with the Democratic Party.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's amazing. We have Mary Talbert there.
Yes, founder of the NIVER movement. Yes.
Right. She was a suffragist, and that's someone who advocates for the right to vote. And we even have, strangely enough, not an American, but still really fascinating, a Russian prince.
We have a Russian prince. Yes, he was. His godfather was Tsar Nicholas, the last Tsar of Russia.
Is that right?
Yes,
That's
yes,
incredible.
Yes.
So if someone wanted to go visit, and could they go, let's say one of our young people are like, wow, I want to see President Fillmore. Can they go?
They can absolutely go. We're open every day from 9 until 5. And they actually do, I'm not sure whether they still have the maps out because of COVID, but we normally have maps out too that will guide you to some of these famous residents. And we also have a downloadable app that you can use, that you can download right onto your phone, that'll take you on a virtual tour of the grounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that because you really have allowed great access to the
Thank
grounds. You have the app, you have the guides, you have a virtual 360 video. So I know our young people will really take advantage of that in their families, and hopefully they'll get a chance to enjoy the 3,500 trees and the 240 birds.
Yes.
But thank you so much, Laura, for
You're
joining
welcome.
us today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of Harmac Medical Products, an award-winning international contract manufacturer of single-use medical devices, located on Bailey Avenue on Buffalo's East Side. For more information, log on to harmac.com. Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of KeyBank in partnership with the First Niagara Foundation. KeyBank, planning a better tomorrow for our clients, communities, and teammates. KeyBank opens doors. For info, log on to keybank.com.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here at the lovely Shades Performing Arts Center with our friend Stanton Hudson, who is the Executive Director for the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural site. And thank you, Stanton, for joining us today.
Michelle, it's a pleasure.
I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you.
So this is actually great timing because 2020 is the year of the elections where we choose our next president.
Exactly.
And so Theodore Roosevelt obviously was one of our very famous American presidents, and his stamp is everywhere in our nation. But what's impressive is he has a big stamp right here in Buffalo. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why he's so significant in the city of Buffalo.
Sure. Well, let me give you a little bit of background first. Roosevelt was very involved in New York State. He was a New York State Assemblyman. He was the police commissioner for New York City. He was the Undersecretary of the Navy. He was the governor of New York. And in 1900, he ran with William McKinley as Vice President of the United States. Now, what's really interesting about Buffalo at the turn of the last century is it was an incredibly wealthy city. A lot of people don't realize that in 1900, Buffalo was the 8th largest city in the country. It had more paved roads than any other city in the entire world. And it had more millionaires per capita than any other city in the United States.
Wow.
All of it being a tribute to being the western terminus of the Erie Canal, which was opened in 1825.
Right. It was bustling.
That's right. So against that backdrop, William McKinley, very popular Republican president in 1900, came here the following year to celebrate the Pan American Exposition. Now, I'm sure some of your students have heard about that.
Yes.
And that's why the Pan Am was here, because Buffalo was such a prominent city nationally and internationally.
That was 1901?
1901, yes indeed. And so McKinley came here. Now, he was supposed to come to open the what was basically a World's Fair.
Right.
He didn't come in May because his wife Ida was ill. So Theodore Roosevelt actually opened the Pan Am in May. McKinley came in September. He came September 5th, gave an address on September the 6th on the grounds of the Pan Am, and unfortunately, an assassin shot McKinley twice.
Oh boy.
8 days later, McKinley died. Roosevelt, who at that time was on a camping trip with his family in the Adirondacks, came rushing back to Buffalo on Saturday, September the 14th. McKinley had died during the night. Roosevelt departed a train in Buffalo at about 1:30 and took the oath of office as our 26th president about 2 hours thereafter.
At your site, at the site?
At the site at 641 Delaware Avenue, that's correct.
Now, I read somewhere that he really didn't want to be vice president, and I'm sure presidency wasn't what he really wanted to do, but he took on that role really well.
He did. He had aspirations to be president someday. And actually, it's an interesting story. The bosses, the political bosses in New York State wanted to get rid of him because Roosevelt, even though he was a Republican, now things have changed a whole heck of a lot in 120 years, but at that time he was a real reformer. And so the bosses in Albany wanted him gone. And so they worked out an arrangement so that he would be on the ticket in 1900.
Ah, so there were some nice agreements going on there. Very interesting.
Not dissimilar to today, I suppose.
So I want to talk a little bit about the home, the house itself, the site, because the site has a lot of history, not only, of course, because of Theodore Roosevelt and McKinley, but there is a long history of it being the barracks. It was it was the largest United States military installation at the time, which surprised me, honestly, and that was in 1838, and it went through a lot of transformations. Can you share some of those with us?
Sure, it actually did. So the barracks was there because there was an uprising in the late 1830s with Canada. Now, go back 20 years, and the village of Buffalo was burned to the ground on New Year's Eve of 1813 during the War of 1812. With this uprising in Canada, people were here in Buffalo, now a city, as of 1832, people were concerned that this uprising could have similar kinds of results. As a consequence of that, this barracks was built we're located almost at the corner of North and Delaware Avenue. Okay. Now, if you could imagine what that was like in 1838, there were no buildings or very few on Delaware Avenue. So you could you're at the high point of the city of Buffalo at that location at North and Delaware. You could look all the way down and see Lake Erie. So if any of those bad people from our neighbors to the north, if they were to invade Buffalo, they'd be spotted right away if they came by boat.
Things have changed since then, haven't they?
Things have changed since then. We have a peace bridge now.
That's right, that's right. So I also know that a big part, it's also named the Wilcox House, or there's a Wilcox Room, and they were really instrumental in keeping that house going. Can you share a little bit about that?
The Wilcox family was a very prominent family. Ansley Wilcox married two sisters.
Well,
not at the same time. And those two sisters were part of the Rumsey family. The Rumsey family was very prominent in Buffalo. One of the Rumseys was actually one of the founders of M&T Bank, which I'm sure many of your students are familiar with. So Ansley Wilcox, Theodore Roosevelt knew one another through a couple of commissions, they served together on, well, Roosevelt was in the New York State Assembly.
Oh, okay,
so
interesting.
that's where the friendship developed. And in
see.
fact, I believe you're going to be doing some touring up in Niagara Falls.
Yes, we will.
Niagara Falls State Park, first state park in the country, was actually established as a result of the work of Ansley Wilcox and Theodore Roosevelt.
How interesting. I love doing this because we see all of this kind of intertwine and weave. We've realized there's so much connectedness in everything that you've done. So we only have a few moments left. Can you talk a little bit to our young Buffalo Public School students what they can do when they visit the site?
Sure. So let me just say that the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural site is the only National Park Service site in the entire Western New York area. It is the place, and there have only been 4 times in American history, by the way, where a president has taken the oath of office outside the nation's capital. So it's important for that too. Students can come to the site and they can have a great time. We put in about 10 years ago a number of interactives. We raised money and invested in interactivity, so there's multimedia throughout the house. So it's not just a boring historic house museum. There's stuff for people of all ages to do, but especially for students. Now, if they can't get there, the other thing I'd just add in finishing up here is go to our website, www.trsite.org. Students can take a virtual tour of the entire site.
Wow, that's great.
And all of these interactives that we have at the site, many of them are accessible online as well. So whether you can get there with parents, guardians, other family members, or you're going to be able to do this online, come to the TR site. You'll have a great time.
That's great. Thank you, Stan, for sharing all of that with us, and thank you for being here with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time in BeEnriched.